Good afternoon, everyone. Excuse it, we had a little bit of confusion backstage, but here we are. Thank y'all for being with us today. I think this is, in fact, I don't think I know. This is an extremely important topic, um, one that deserves our attention and our care. And I am very honored to have Mrs. Coleman-Adebayo here with us today to join us and talk about something that I think everybody needs to know about. So, for those of you who are joining us who are not familiar with what the massive work of the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition has been doing, just to let y'all know, the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, BACC, was started by the Macedonia Baptist Church, and it is a union of volunteers, activists, community groups, and faith-based organizations led by the Social Justice Ministry at Macedonia Baptist Church. So y'all in Maryland got a lot to be proud of with this. The BACC seeks to stop the desecration of Moses African Cemetery, preserve the rich history of this once thriving African community, and consecrate Moses African Cemetery with a memorial and a museum on River Road in Bethesda, Maryland. And so for folks who don't know about this struggle and the fact that the ongoing desecration of African and African American burial sites and former townships is something that is widespread in this country. We have a real problem with this, throughout the country, where developers come in and treat these sacred sites as less than sacred. You want to build a parking lot, you want to build, like in the case of Bethesda, Maryland, parking lots and apartment complexes over what are essentially holy sites. Mm-hmm. And you think we're not going to say anything about that. Mm-hmm. It's just one example of the continuing devaluation of Black life. Mm-hmm. So we are very, very honored to have Ms. Coleman-Adebayo here with us today. And Howie, you've got a few words too.
Yeah, well, during the presidential campaign, I was able to participate in one of the demonstrations they have against this desecration of the cemetery. And this is one of many assaults on the Black community in Bethesda that goes back a long time that I'm sure Marsha will talk about. But in this case, it's just real estate interests, overriding all human interests. And, people should know that Marsha Coleman-Adebayo was a famous whistleblower in the EPA during the 1990s about a U.S. company that was doing a vanadium mine in South Africa and a lot of pollution. And she tried to get that addressed and had to whistleblow about it because EPA was not. And then in the course of working in EPA and that struggle, she filed a discrimination suit based on racial and sex discrimination, which she won. And she'd been involved in the Green Party. Jill Stein put her in her shadow cabinet back several years ago. So, this struggle for the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition is led in part by a Green Party member. So, Marsha, thanks for being here, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. One of the things that I would add, if I could add something immediately, is that this struggle is about more than simply a cemetery. If it was just simply about a cemetery, that would be enough, because that's fundamental in terms of Black Lives Matter, whether we're alive or dead. But fundamentally, this is a struggle to break the spine of white supremacy. And we understand that the struggle to break the spine of white supremacy started in 1619 when these group of bandits, this criminal cartel, decided to engage in human trafficking from Africa to the United States. And they decided that they were going to bring people from traditional kingdoms, well-established, scientific, innovative, agriculturally advanced kingdoms to the United States because they didn't know how to grow commercial crops on a commercial level. And Bethesda, Maryland was one of the sites of this criminal enterprise. And when the people were murdered during this criminal enterprise that Europeans want to call slavery. It was actually European barbarism. Their bodies were in fact thrown in a place called Moses African Cemetery. And so this site is an African cemetery, but it's so much more. And Montgomery County has been working against us for the last 5 years because they do not want this history to ever see the light of day.
And I think what you said, I mean, is so incredibly powerful, especially, at a time when we're talking about, when we're saying Black Lives Matter, how deep that goes, that it is not just, we're not just addressing the harm our communities experience through state violence via the police, but also this is ongoing state violence. And I would argue this is part genocide.
The definition of genocide. Yes.
And do you want to give people a little bit of the history of Moses Cemetery and that community?
Sure. I mean, it's an amazing history that we will not be able to get through in days, months, years. And to the credit of the people in this area, we've spent the last 5 years now researching this history, because when we first started, when we first found out that there was possibly an African burial ground, as you said earlier, the state, Montgomery County, in collusion with businesses, actually sealed this cemetery. It's actually not a cemetery. Cemetery is really a European concept. This is really a burial ground. They actually, and on a real level, this is a mass grave. If we're going to look at it on a real level, there was no ceremonial internment of these bodies. These bodies were dumped after they were of no longer use to white plantation owners. We call them just what they were, terrorists. And so this is really an African burial ground. And so these people arrive on River Road around the late 1700s, early 1800s. At that point, in what was happening in sort of on the Eastern Shore, Williamsburg, Fort Hampton, is that they were trying to develop a varietal of tobacco that was going to be useful to agreeable to the European taste. They finally figured this combination of tobaccos out around the mid 1600s. So by late 1700s, this tobacco varietal has transported itself to places like Bethesda, Maryland. There are 4 plantations. Again, since I'm talking to Green Party people, I'm not going to use colonial words. There are 4 death camps on River Road, because the goal, perhaps for white folks, was to grow various crops. But when Black folks came to these areas, they went there to die. So I think that if we can extend the idea of death camps to Jews and other nationalities, we need to really begin to think about we need to stop using polite words that reinforce these idyllic, beautiful places of plants and trees, and begin to talk about what was really happening. And that is that Black people were being tortured to death. And so these death camps are on River Road, and there are 4 of them. There's the Councilman, the Posey, the Loughborough, and the Shoemaker. And they're basically working people to death between the late 1700s until around 1807. And this tobacco is being literally rolled down River Road all the way to Georgetown, where it makes its way onto a steamship to go to Europe, which is the reason why it's important for Black folks in this country to know that not only did we create this vast economic system in the United States, we built Europe. We built Europe. Every bale of cotton that got off the boats in Liverpool or Manchester had our blood on it. And every European that put on a pair of trousers or a dress had our blood on it. We built Europe. It's important for Black people to understand that. We built the United States. We also built Europe. Our blood built it. And then around 1807, you have this confluence of problems because tobacco is very hard on the soil. It just sucks in the phosphorus and other kinds of chemicals. And so then these terrorists had a problem. Well, if the soils will no longer produce tobacco, what other industry can we put our money in that will be as productive as tobacco? And since this European barbaric trade, this human trafficking trade that white folks like to call the transatlantic slave trade, since it was beginning to wind down around 1807, and there was going to be a labor deficit in the South of African people, they decided that they would basically transfer these death camps into sexual violence camps against African women. The Europeans, of course, like to call these breeding camps. So then they started buying up little African girls. And they started literally corporate scale sexual violence camps on River Road. And so these little girls were forced into prostitution, into pedophilia, into all kinds of deviant sexual European fantasies. And of course, 50% of them die actually in childbirth. They bleed out in childbirth as young as 10, 12 years old. Those bodies are in the grave site that we are trying to save. So this site, as far as I'm concerned, really should be a United Nations World Heritage Site, because half the people who lie in this burial ground are not even Americans. We don't become Americans. We're not forced into American citizenship, I should say, because no one asked us. There was never a plebiscite in 1865 to ask African Americans whether they wanted to be Americans. They signed the 13th Amendment. They took away our citizenship from kingdoms that we have been paying taxes to, that we have been sending our children to school. They just take away our citizenship and they declare that you are going to be Americans. Why? Because they still need our labor. And so they force us into this contractual relationship. And so half the bodies in this cemetery, in this burial ground, are non-Americans. They're not Americans. Did not want to be Americans. As Harriet Tubman would have told you, I'm not an American, don't want to be an American, right? I am an African woman. And then the other half live to live past post-emancipation, and they're buried in this. So this is, when you talk about sacred, this is a place that every Black person, every white person, every European needs to come to once a year, and they need to do a Hajj at River Road. They need to get on their knees and they need to thank these Africans that are buried in this ground for giving them the kind of economic future that we enjoy today. And so that is what we're fighting for. And that's what we're going to continue to fight for. We are talking about breaking the spine of white supremacy, telling the story, telling the truth about what these Africans did. And despite that, everything that we know, they still created vibrant communities. They still raised their families. They still built a church. They still built a school. They did everything everybody else was doing, including building Europe and the United States. So that's the story that we're telling.
Next question's on you, Howie.
Well, why don't you talk about, more recently, when I was there, they were excavating a site for an apartment building, and there were
a storage company.
Oh, okay, a storage company. There was apartment building before,
right?
And a storage company, which
it's even
makes less sense.
Yeah.
And there were remnants of, I don't know if they were gravestones or, being just pulled up by the backhoes and thrown in a pile.
That's right.
So why don't you talk about, what's the more recent struggle and what's going on?
Let's talk about the power of the Green Party here. Let's talk about the power of the Green. Let's talk about people's power. Because the day that you came, they were supposed to continue the excavation of what these monsters think of as trash. Our ancestors is what they thought of as trash. And they had, as you remember, they had the tractors out there, they had the big machines out there, but because they knew you were coming, did you see any of that activity that day, Howie?
No, and I'm a former construction worker. It looks strange.
Yeah, and so that's why you heard us shouting that day, we shut them down. We shut them down. We shut them down that day, Howie. And we were expecting, because as you know, one of the symbols of our movement is that we actually stopped 15-wheeler trucks from going into the cemetery. We put our bodies in front of these trucks and we stopped them. We have stopped dozens of these trucks. And the managers actually give the truck drivers, tell the truck drivers, run over them. And we still stand there, and we still stand there. And we talk to the truck drivers, and we say, if those were your grandparents, if those were your mothers in this cemetery, would you want someone to start digging them up and sending them to a landfill? So the day that you came, we were prepared to stop more trucks that day. We had the big sign. We had all the people there, maybe a couple hundred people there. We were gonna stop trucks, and they were so afraid of your visit and my sister's visit to that day that they told the workers, you can take the day off. So do you know how much money they lost that day? Because they had to pay for all those trucks that were in the cemetery, and that's by the hour. They had to pay for all the workers who were supposed to be there to desecrate. And I must tell you, the good news, and this is about people power, they haven't opened that cemetery in the last 6 months. They haven't opened. It is closed. Now, Amilcar Cabral says, tell no lies and claim no easy victories. So I am not going to claim that we are the sole reason for why they have closed the cemetery. But I am here to say that they've lost a whole lot of money in the last 6 months. And they had taken out a $30 million loan plus interest to build the cemetery. And it's been closed now for 6 months. So they have lost money. What we have gained, however, is community, because we have brought together segments of our community from Washington to Virginia to Maryland who have said enough is enough. That this is, as when one talks about symbols of white supremacy, you can talk about statutes and you can talk about this, but you've got to talk about African graveyards and African burial grounds as being perplexed symbols of white supremacy, because white supremacy says that we don't exist, that what we did was insignificant, that when we died, that was the end of our usefulness to the world. And by fighting for Black African burial grounds, we're saying you haven't even told half the story yet. You haven't even started telling this story yet. These were the baddest Black people who ever walked on the face of the earth. We have learned so much about our ancestors. And I must tell you, there are days when I get tired and there are days when I become depressed. And then I think about those little Black girls dragged from their homes in Africa, put into one of these sexual violence camps. And I say, you know what? I can get up today. I can do whatever I need to do, because if she could do it under those conditions, there's nothing I can't do. There's no wall I can't scale. I can walk between here and Washington because I know a little Black girl did that when she was looking for her freedom. So these stories are important for our children, because when our children are being faced with all kinds of craziness, they need to know where they came from and the kind of DNA that they're built from. And that is the reason why the state takes such pains to destroy these cemeteries, because they contain our history, and it is a history of valiant and noble struggle. And that's what, so they want to think that our history begins and ends with Jay-Z or Beyonce. That's what they want our children to believe. I want our children to understand our history started 3,000 years ago, that we were the ones that walked across the Sahara Desert, that we built the pyramids in Egypt, that we were the ones that created the field of tropical medicine, we were the ones that created, that performed the first cataract surgery, one of the most delicate surgeries that even now doctors perform. We did that at the University of Timbuktu. Europeans came to Africa to learn how to perform surgery. We need to teach our children, and we're teaching our children these lessons through Moses African Cemetery. So we just got a grant from the 400 Years of African American History. And the goal of this grant is to teach these lessons through tabletop exhibits that we can take all over the country, and we can talk about the golden age of Africa when Europe was in the dark ages. We can talk about the struggle that we have created in Bethesda, Maryland, to stop the desecration of Moses. And I must tell you, people always ask all of us, what are you guys thinking when you're standing in front of a Mack truck? Because it's insane what we do. And what I am thinking of is, I'm actually thinking about Harriet Tubman at that moment, to be honest with you, because Macedonia Baptist Church, which sits across the street, which is where I met you, Howie, you actually parked your car in the parking lot of Macedonia Baptist Church when you came. It was one of the stations of the Underground Railroad. And Africans who were escaping this terrorism, this barbarism, they came to this plot of land, which is sacred, because this was their command center. They'd like to call it slave quarters, but we know that this was a command center. This is where the plans were drawn up. This is where the strategy was developed. This is where people got their marching orders. And then they knew that if they could just get from Macedonia to about another 5 miles to Washington, D.C., they would be free. So this was a very important place where you parked your car. And so when I'm out there and others are out there stopping these trucks, I'm saying, you know what? This ain't nothing. This is easy stuff. This is easy. Stopping a truck, anybody can do that. But what they did, that's the hard stuff. So we're actually in the process of creating cadres that can do the hard stuff, because we're already doing the easy stuff.
As a dump truck driver myself by trade, by profession, to hear you say this, and all I can think about is being the person driving that truck.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how I'd handle it. It's like, I'm back here. Y'all got it.
And you know what, Angela? So many people have turned their trucks around. They've turned their trucks around. They said,
Yes.
I don't have a nickel in this fight. You know what I'm trying to say? These are my people. I talked to this one Ethiopian dump truck driver, and he was driving a Mack truck, and I said, you came all the way from Africa to destroy another African burial ground? Are you kidding, brother? And he said, oh, this is the place that I've been reading about. I said, yeah. He said, that's all I need to know, sis. He turned the truck around and went back. So we have to talk to workers, and we have to talk to people who we know have the same interests that we have. Because there's a big difference between the people who own this place and the people who work there. And so our position is, when we eat, we give them cupcakes, even if they don't want to take it sometimes, whatever it is, but we let them know that our struggle is the same struggle. And we're trying to bring you over to our side so that eventually at some point you'll stand in front of a truck too and tell these people to turn around and go back home.
And if anybody is tuning in and y'all are, my fellow truck driving fam, yo, you in Maryland, these are the lines we don't cross, family. We don't cross these lines.
That's right.
Do y'all want to, Howie, do you want to start taking questions? Because we've got some stuff in the chat that I think might be interesting for things that folks might want to know. I know that Jenny, who is a dear friend and a member of our family, and she was asking to your question, Ms. Adebayo, about what time of the year do you think would be appropriate if people were considering making like offertory pilgrimages to the site? What time of year do you think would be the most appropriate for that?
That's really a great question. One of the youth of our group, we have a large youth group, which is wonderful, and we started a community day where we invite all the businesses and we invited all the community to come over, and we have music and dancing and because African burial grounds are not like European cemeteries. If you've ever been to an African funeral, people are dancing. I mean, people are shouting. People are doing, that they really, and so that's what we do. We dance, we shout, we have fun. We talk to our ancestors. We call them out. We pour our libations. Because, as I keep telling everybody, we are not Americans. We are Africans. And so we're not assuming that colonial title anymore, so we are us, we do what we know what is comfortable for us to do. So, we've got songwriters, we've got people who do spoken word, we've got, all kinds of folks who come out from the community. And that happens in early September because, Washington, D.C. can get really hot. And so we're trying to do it when we know where people aren't going to be fainting from heat. So we're doing it around what we call Community Day. And we would love to have you guys all come out this Community Day and celebrate with us. And regardless of whether or not there is a structure, a self-storage company on that space or not, we have claimed that area. We've claimed it. And so anyone who wants to put their junk in that storage company will have to go through our bodies. So we have decided that if in fact they decide to try to put this thing up again, we will go into a national boycott. And our goal is to close them down. And our goal is to close them down in such a way that no one will ever think about doing this again. So this is not the typical little Black community fighting for a cemetery. We consider this struggle, and we haven't gotten to the armed part of this yet. But but we are at a point now of saying, we are nonviolent, and because we are not Proud Boys, we are not white supremacists, the police come after us. And so, we have a security detail there to protect us from the police. Our position is that we don't need the police, that we police ourselves. But the police do come out, and they rough us up and they arrest us and they do it, what they're getting paid to do. But this is a struggle. This is a struggle, and we will continue this struggle. Now, and I'm not sure how long this interview is, but I did want folks to know that we just had a bill introduced into the Maryland General Assembly. It's HB 1099. It's called the Historic African American Cemeteries Preservation Fund and Study. We need folks to sign up for it actually on Monday between 10 in the morning and 1 o'clock to speak in support of Moses African Cemetery and other Black cemeteries throughout Maryland. So we do need people to do that. We have space for 50 people to address Maryland delegates. And we're also trying to find someone in Congress, maybe Jamie Raskin, if he's listening, that we would love to also have a bill in the House of Representatives that would address this issue. So we are looking at those kinds of legislative opportunities as well.
Is there a link that we can share via social media with our folks to get the word out to all of our family in Maryland?
Yeah, if you go to Facebook, Facebook, look on the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, and you'll see the links. And also you'll be able to click and you'll see the bill. And the bill is not exactly what we wanted. I mean, because we are working with politicians, but it's a start. And what we're trying to do is to use the bill to really have a conversation about what's going on.
All right, fam. So just a quick note on that. If y'all are not following the Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition, if y'all are not following them on Facebook, I'm gonna need y'all to do that. And all of our fam in Maryland, if you are able to show up on Monday and speak in support of HB 1099, the information is going to be on that Facebook page. So I'm gonna need y'all to follow them.
Good. Now they sign up on Monday, but they don't speak until Wednesday.
I got you. See, this is why I have to have documents, because I'll be talking out my head.
Well, no, it's good. It's just that they've made folks' participation as difficult and complicated as possible, because there's no reason why you couldn't sign up on Wednesday and speak on Wednesday. But, it's just a way of discouraging people by saying, oh, you didn't sign up on Monday between 10 and 2? Oh, sorry, you can't speak, right? So we got to play their game a little bit. That's it.
And one of the things that I'm thinking of, and our family, Gara Brown, has a really good question in the chat about the Green Party making the preservation of Black cemeteries a part of our agenda. I think that's, Howie, something I think that's, that we're all Green Party members. I think that's definitely something we need to bring up. And I am going to introduce this, Gara baby, into the Black Caucus. We have a meeting tomorrow. So thank you for the nudge, because I got something to bring to them. And I think one of the things that I personally want people to know, and I think you will speak to it perfectly, is the African concept of these burial spaces, our relationship to transitioning, to death, to the land herself, versus, this is not just a cemetery. When we say that these burial sites are sacred, in the same way that Indigenous people understand these burial sites to be sacred, I think it's very important that people understand our connection as Africans to our ancestry and our lineage. And if you would speak to that for a little bit.
Sure. My husband is Nigerian, and I'm really glad, and not glad, that's the wrong word, but his father died before my mother did. And in many ways that really helped me get through my mother's passing, because in Africa, there's a very thin line between life and death. I mean, the ancestors are not these pieces of dead wood that you put in a coffin and you forget about them. They are such an intricate part of your life, and they stay with you. They protect you. They in fact, when my father-in-law transitioned, they brought him back home. He slept in his own bed for about a week or so. I don't know, freaked me out. But I'm just trying to say, he was at home. And people treated him with the same level of respect and honor. And when he went to, and when we took him to the church, what was very interesting, in most settings, you have a place just for the immediate family and then everybody else. When we got to the church, we didn't have a place to sit because the whole village thought of themselves as a part of his immediate family. And so we actually, had to sort of tell a couple of people, would you mind scooting down a little bit? Because his son needs to sit on the front row. And the person would look at you and say, I knew your father before you knew your father. What are you talking about? You're his son. I'm his son too. So the concept of family and the concept of who belongs and this craziness that we've gotten into with European society is really, but it's not us, because we know that our family stays with us. We understand that. And I must tell you that the way I found out about the little girls was through this ancestral connection. We were doing work on, as I said, on the cemetery, and I got a flu and I was in bed for a while. And so I was reading a lot about the New York Burial Ground Project. And the question that I had was, what is the difference between the New York Burial Ground Project and our project? And it was at the same time that I started reading a little bit about the sexual abuse of little African girls. And I don't know why I was reading that at that time, except that I think in many ways I was spiritually drawn to read something about that. And I remember one day just going to the burial ground, and I had one of these little folding chairs. And I literally sat there and I said, okay, you guys, you talk to me, because something happened here. And it's not in the textbooks. It's not written down anywhere. But I am not leaving here until you guys talk to me and you tell me what happened to you. And I literally sat there, I bet, for 2 hours. And finally, all I could hear was screams. And I just said, I don't know what it means. I don't know what this means. And I had to go there 2 or 3 times. I had to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, if you understand what that means. Because my family, like your family, we all went through this sexual abuse. I mean, that's the reason why we look the way we look, right? And I eventually I started doing more digging and more digging. And then finally, a friend of mine on a group brought to me, and I started telling people something happened here. We don't know what happened, but something happened here. And then one day, one of my colleagues, who's an archivist, used to work for the U.S. Archives, brought a U.S. Census report to me. He said, Marsha, look at this. And what it was that the Councilman death camp was made up of 70% young girls. And I said, oh my God, these girls were not picking tobacco, not at 10, 11, 12 years old. And that's when we started doing our research. And then one, of course, when you're doing research, one link leads to another link, which leads to another link. And then we looked at the following U.S. Census report 10 years later, and I was expecting that, Black girl X10 would have been 20 years old now, 10 years later. I couldn't find a single Black girl that was on the previous census that was now on the census 10 years later. Not one. So we're trying to still figure that out. Does it mean that a percentage of them died in childbirth, so that's why they're not being picked up by U.S. Census? Does it mean that they've been sold into the Deep South, and that's the reason why they're not there? Did 2 or 3 escape to freedom? We don't know. So we're trying to figure out now, what does it mean that all of those girls, that none of them survived 10 years in that place? What does it mean? It's a huge question that we're trying to answer now. What happened to those little girls? What happened to them?
And the last thing that I'm going to say, just personally, as somebody who practices ancestor veneration,
Mm-hmm.
that you and I'm sure you hit me in my spirit. And thinking about the fact that I will be memorializing my mom one day. So,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
that if I did not practice ancestor reverence, I don't know how I would have stood up under the loss of her.
That's,
So everything that you said resonated very deeply with me.
right.
And Howie, I'm gonna concede to you because I'm a mess over here.
I'm just barely holding on myself because it's hard for me to tell. As often as I tell this story, um, it's hard. It's a hard story to tell. And it hits me very deeply because my grandmother would have been what was called a fancy girl. She had white skin and blue eyes and blonde hair. And she was the victim of rape. Her sisters, they were all victims of rape. And and at some point they knew that by the time they became 12, 14, they would be vulnerable to any white man who wanted to rape them. And so that was their journey to go to Detroit, Michigan, in order to get away from just becoming what they call the enslaved womb, or the enslaved breast, as they like to call us. And I'm grateful to her. But I think about her when I'm reading this, that this is not just history for me. This is my history. This is my history. Yes.
So Eliani Clark asks, can you ask Mrs. Coleman-Adebayo, when were the ballpark times in history that the Bethesda Cemetery was actually used, and when was it stopped? I'm very curious from a historical perspective.
Okay, so Harry, the place that you went to where you saw the digging, that was a community there. There was the Warren family. There was the Rivers sisters. There was Charlotte Gray. In fact, the part of Bethesda that you visited was called Grayland. It was called Grayland because Charlotte Gray had bought up so much property 3 years after European barbarism or slavery that they actually named this area for her. That's how bad this woman was. She was buying anything that she could get her hands on. So they called it Grayland. And a part of that community was playing baseball. They loved baseball. And so Harvey Matthews, that you met that day, he was a baseball player. And so in the place that they dug up as a part of the cemetery was also the baseball field. And we actually saw little bits and pieces of different things as they were digging it up. But they also dug up a historic baseball. And there was a really famous baseball player who came out and played with them one day. I forgot who it was. Wait a minute. I'm not a sports person. So who was like the most famous Black baseball player what was his name? The one who broke the color line.
Jackie Robinson.
Jackie Robinson, I believe, came out and played with the Negro baseball players on River Road. And they have a picture of him. It was either Scotland or River Road. And he came out and he gave them some pointers and that sort of thing. It's a very historic area that they think so much of, they're going to put a storage company right on top of it.
And part of the history more recent is the displacement of that Black community by gentrification.
Yeah.
And can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, very, very, very sad. We don't really use the word gentrification. We call it ethnic cleansing. Yeah, so you have this ethnic cleansing coming in from this community to this community from a lot of different areas. You have it coming in from the government, of course. There's a very famous senator called Newlands. Senator Newlands, he created something called the Chevy Chase Land Office, and he was just creating a new community called Chevy Chase, which was to be a community that a white enclave, and he had a central problem, and that is he had this black community that was very close to Chevy Chase, which is the Bethesda River Road community. And he said he didn't want those black squatters around his pristine Chevy Chase, Maryland community. And he said, we are going to make a plan to scatter them. So you had, government officials with a plan to scatter the Negroes on River Road. You had the businesses who worked hand in hand, as we now know, with the KKK. The KKK was developed, there was a massive demonstration of the KKK in Washington around 1926. And after the KKK, you have the development of the Maryland State Parks and Planning Commission, because the KKK was a bit rough on the edges. I mean, they went around burning crosses and hanging people. And at some point, like the mafia realized, we can go legit. We don't have to go around burning people up, and we can go legit. And so they created something called the Maryland Capital Parks and Planning. Every single county has it. And basically they are the ethnic cleansers, but they use all kinds of, laws and amendments and water treatment systems. And, do you have water in your home? If you don't have you fallen back on your taxes? Oh, you have? Okay, we got to come in and take your home. So they decided to do what the KKK did, but using legal instruments, as opposed to a whole bunch of white men dressing up in white and going out and scaring the hippie chibbies out of people. So you had government, you had the private sector, you had terrorism, which is the KKK and now the Proud Boys or whatever they could, the Boogaboos and all that, sort of the legacy of the KKK. And then you had the general society of just white supremacy, of just white folks believing that Black people were not human. And therefore, they were only put on earth to serve them. And therefore, when we weren't serving them, like when we were dead, then, they could just dig us up and plop another building there. So you had this confluence of all these different forces that compose what we call the structure of white supremacy. And all those structures came together on River Road. So not one family survived that structure of white supremacy, not one. And the only structure that survived was a little church on a hill called Macedonia Baptist Church. And if it had not been for Macedonia, I wouldn't be able to tell you this story, because since they left an institution standing, that meant that there was institutional memory there. And so when we started doing our research, we started going into all the paperwork that had been put under the pews and the hymnals and the little notes that were written on the side of notes. And we were able to begin to piece together some of the history. So preserving Black institutions is critical to telling Black history. And the church becomes the centerpiece of that.
Yeah. And I'm looking at, folks' comments in the chat, and, how they're like, how your words are resonating with folks, like in the ways that we've been taught to think about violence against African people in this country in in certain terms, but how deep it goes, how insidious it is,
Mm-hmm.
how that violence changes faces to make itself
Mm-hmm.
more accessible to the people who benefit from and perpetrate it.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul Flansburgh, hey darling, is saying that reparations can only attempt to pay what's owed.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it should be dividends plus, not only plus dividends, because it's not just giving you a core set of money. It's got to be the dividends that come off of that money, because money makes money, and by just giving you one triage of money, that doesn't really tell sort of the long 400-year history. So it's got to be reparations and dividends, right? And then also, I think it also has to take into account the fact that they made us landless. I mean, when I go back to my husband's village in Nigeria, that land is making money. I mean, they're growing stuff on it, they're selling stuff off of it. Well, what happened to our lands in Africa? What happened to our heritage? We still have a right to that heritage. I am still a landowner somewhere in Africa, and I want to be able to take advantage of what my great-great-great-grandfather put his sweat and blood into. And he meant it for me. He meant for me to take advantage of that in Cameroon, in Nigeria. And so I am also not just looking at reparations in terms of the United States. I want reparations in Africa too. I want African governments to begin to stop acting like we are some kind of stepchildren. We are African children, and we deserve everything that other Africans deserve. And we're going to fight for that as well, because that is our heritage. That's our heritage. So we want dividends, and we want interest, and we want reparations, and we want it. We want all of it. We want all of it, and we deserve it. And I actually think we should be talking about reparations in Europe, because Europe is built on the backs of Black people. So I think it's ridiculous that we're only talking to America. We need to be talking to England and France and Germany and Belgium and Amsterdam and all the places that they use our blood to build Europe. We need to be talking about reparations in Europe as well. We need to begin to look at the whole picture, and not just our history does not start in America. Our history starts in Africa, and it spreads out. But Europe is an important part. So I was really happy when I saw all those statues falling in Europe, because they were saying this history, what happened to this brother, didn't start just in the United States. What happened to him is also happening in Europe. So we need to have a much broader discussion on this.
Ashe.
Ashe Madupe.
Elizabeth Freeman Holder. Hey, love. Hobbler, excuse me, sweetie. Mm-hmm. We want to know where we are from. I want reparations that can tell me where my ancestors are from and the tribes that I belong to. Absolutely.
Right. Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I did my ancestry, and at least on my maternal side, I'm Cameroonian from the Mafa group. And now in Cameroon, it's a corrupt government. So I've been working with Cameroonians to try to clean up our government in Cameroon, so that people like me can go back to Cameroon. Now they do have a program in Cameroon that if you can show your ancestry, that they will provide land. If you can provide a business plan, and you can show how you will use the land. I want you just to sit on it. And I agree with that, actually. I think in Ghana, there's also programs. We have to really push Nigeria, but Nigeria's got a difficult government. But we need to begin to really interact with these governments, because, we have something at stake here. And so, I know we get real focused on America, but we're not Americans, we're Africans. And so we need to be committed to both focusing on where we have to survive right here, but also focusing on another part of the world too, other parts of the world that owe us for what we've brought to the table.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. We need the Catholic Church. That's true. And the Catholic Church has built these beautiful granite tombstones that they have placed in almost, I'm not sure if they've done it yet, in almost all the Catholic cemeteries, acknowledging that the Catholic Church would not bury Black people in Catholic cemeteries. And I think that's a good first step, but it is a little teeny step. We need to really have an audience and say, we like the granite, guys, but let's talk about real money here. Let's talk about the money that the Catholic Church made off of this human trafficking trade. I mean, you guys were blessing those ships when they pulled away. So we want to know, and we want to know, how do we now begin to work together so you guys can solve your financial debt to the people that you exploited.
And if I'm not mistaken, I'm thinking that, and you can correct me on this, both you and Howie can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it's also in the manifesto James Foreman came up with in 1969 that, y'all owe us.
Yeah.
And so this call, Miss Leo is, a member of our Green family. Absolutely. Absolutely, because you are still profiting off of what continues to be done to us.
I mean, and just go to the Vatican.
Thank you.
Where did that money come from for all that gold? And in fact, I don't even think they don't mine gold in Rome.
No.
I mean, think about the fact that almost every single gem that is in the crown of Queen Elizabeth came from Africa. Even her crown does not come from Europe. It comes from Africa.
And just thinking of, in the Vatican City, thinking of what's up above the ground, those catacombs, who has any idea what is in those things and how many people they were taken from? All of your major museums throughout Europe, that's our stuff.
That's our stuff.
That's our stuff.
It's all of us. It's if you go to the British Museum, which is where, if you really want to see African art, go to the British Museum. They stole all of it. That's where it is. And they need to give it back. They need to give it back. It's not theirs. They stole it. It's stolen goods. They need to give it back. And they need to give it back with interest and dividends, because they've been making money. You have to pay, unlike in New York where you don't have to pay to go to the museum. A lot of museums in Europe, you have to pay to go into those museums. They've been making a lot of money on our stuff, and they need to pay it back.
Howie, you want to jump in there? Because I could testify, and I'm going to cut myself short.
Well, my thought in this whole discussion, going from Moses Cemetery to reparations, is that if somebody put, you can't put a dollar figure on this. So part of reparations, which is about repairing and making whole, is not just a material thing, it's a spiritual thing. That's why Black history is so important. And the idea of a truth and reconciliation process, so people know how we got here and what the problems are. And Biden talks about healing our souls. I mean, he hasn't got a clue. Right now, he's backing a dictator in Haiti. The country where the only successful slave rebellion in history, where they founded a nation. And we're still on top of the backs of that country. So, we got a long way to go. But, when we talk about reparations, it's not just putting a dollar figure and individual and collective reparations and land. It's also about people understanding how we got to where we are and how we make it better. And so that's what I've been thinking about as this discussion's gone along.
Yeah, it's not just about money, and it's not just about, but it is a lot about money, and it is a lot about land, because land is the basis of all wealth. And it's also not just about doing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which I was really involved in because I'm an Africanist by profession, and I think it was a total and complete disaster. Their goal was to repair the nation without addressing the criminality, so that people would actually go there and say, yeah, I killed Steve Biko, and then some priest would give them the sign of the cross, and they would go out. No, they needed to go to jail. And they needed to go to jail for killing Steve Biko. They needed to go to jail for all these crimes. And so we need to figure out, how do we tell this story in a way that justice is served? It's not just when you kill someone and then you're able to walk out because someone has put a cross on top of your head. We need justice. We need more than reconciliation. We need justice. And that's what we don't have. We don't have justice. And so it's one of the things that I'm sort of turned off, as much as I love the Poor People's Campaign. It's one of the things that just sort of, it just doesn't feel right to me. Because people get into this repairing and feeling spiritually rejuvenated. And then you walk out the street and a Black boy is murdered. And you go, well, where's the justice? So if we start putting these police in jail for long sentences, and we start to really think about, what does justice look like? You know, is it just people saying, I'm sorry? Or is it, you know, putting some material, making sure that when people have committed crimes, and that's what we're talking about. We're talking about crimes. When people have committed crimes, there has to be a remedy for that crime. And if that's going to jail, if that's, you know, whatever it is. I mean, like in South Africa, you know, Julius Malema, he says, give us the land because we're tired of being hungry. We need to grow food, so give us the land. And so even though, so there's a part of me that wants to do the kumbaya thing. And then there's another part of me that says, we need land, we need food, we need money, we need material benefits, and we need, more importantly, justice. We need justice. And then once we have all that, then I'm ready to sing kumbaya, and I'm ready to forgive and forget and all that sort of stuff. But first, you got to take care of the basic needs of the people. And that's what Amilcar Cabral was talking about, is that people want to talk in very theoretical terms, but the peasants are talking about, how do I survive today? And we're dealing with a Black woman in Maryland right now whose son was shot 7 times in the back by police 2 weeks ago. In fact, 2 days after the attempted coup d'etat in Washington. And you know, and a group of Black ministers wanted to pray for her, and she said, no, put the policeman in jail. That's what I want. I want the policeman in jail, you know, and we can pray while he's going to jail, but he needs to go to jail. So anyway, that was just my reaction. I agree with you. We need spiritual healing, but along with spiritual healing is that we need justice.
Yeah, I agree with that. You got to talk about the land. You got to talk about money,
yes,
material. That's part of reparations. But I guess it's just sort of bourgeois, you know, pay me off and I'll go out my way, when in the end, we're all living in the same world. And it's not just about, you know, making a payoff and then saying everything's okay, because we don't change the system. It's a system based on exploitation, capitalism. And the capitalists are going to figure out how to exploit people and use racial divisions or any division they can to weaken the people they exploit. So anyway, I was just saying that conversation reminded me that, and actually in the reparations bill, there's mention of that has to be part of the process, but it sometimes, you know, gets out of the conversation. And as this conversation is going on, you know, there's a lot of gut-wrenching things that happen that people don't even know. And then they wonder why we got a problem today. So all I'm saying is that's got to be part of the process, but it's no substitute for justice. I completely agree with that.
And we are over an hour because this was an absolutely necessary conversation, and I want to respect your time, Mrs. Coleman-Adebayo. Any plugs you want to give our people? How do they find you? How do they follow you? How do they follow the coalition's work? Give them all of that.
Yeah, no, I think Green. Please go to Facebook. We've sort of had to take some drastic measures with our website, so it's up. Bethesda African Cemetery Coalition. Please go there. But you know, the developers have been threatening to do all kinds of crazy stuff, and so we decided that we were going to focus more on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. So please go there. And, you know, follow us. We need help. I mean, I'm not shy in terms of asking for help. In fact, one of our major leaders of our movement, Tim Willard, Dr. Tim Willard, is Green Party, as you know, and Nancy Wallace and so many wonderful people in the Green Party. So the Green Party is very active in the Washington in this movement. And so we ask everyone to please come out, support us. If you have some money, we could certainly use money because this is an expensive struggle. And so I tend not to be shy about talking about money, just because I think it's a material good that we need as long as we're dealing with the issues that we're dealing with right now. So, you know, $5, $10, $20, you know, it all works. It all spins. But please come out. We need your bodies. We need people to sing. Whatever you do to help us, we would be very appreciative of all of that.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Ms. Coleman-Adebayo, for taking your time today and bringing your wisdom and the work that you've done and bringing your heart to this discussion.
Thank you.
Which is, like I said, you know, and you said it perfectly earlier, this is our history. You know, as a Black, you know, African woman born on these shores to people that I know were enslaved. You know, this is my history. Even though my people, you know, come up through a different part of the country. This is different for us. And I just cannot thank you enough for everything that you brought to this conversation and that you made yourself available to us and to our community today. I thank you.
Well, I thank you for this opportunity. Thank you very much.